join me in welcoming Captain Bryan Schroeder from Camp Phoenix in Kabul, Afghanistan. Bryan is an honorary member of the Michigan Reading Association and one of our international literacy connections, extending the mission of literacy overseas in Afghanistan. Bryan, in addition to serving our country in the reserves, we'd like to learn more about your involvement with the organization Project Outreach.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Operation Outreach was started here around March 2010 and has grown in membership ever since it started. The membership in Kabul has grown to about 210 members. The membership is made up of Army, Marines, Air Force, and Navy soldiers from the U.S. I became a member when I was deployed here about 7 months ago. I am currently the Deputy Director of Organizations for Operation Outreach. I'm responsible for setting up missions with schools and orphanages and refugee camps as they come up on our radar for being in need. My first couple months I was here, I served as a logistical chairperson, which I was responsible for tracking the thousands of dollars and thousands of item donations that come in from the United States every week. Our highest priority is providing school supplies for the schools that are located here in Kabul, and we'll talk about that a little later about how undersupplied they are.
Bryan, describe Afghanistan classroom for me. What does it look like, sound like?
The classrooms here in Afghanistan aren't anything that we could ever imagine with our experiences in the United States. Most of the Afghanistan classrooms are extremely overcrowded with very little to no supplies. I've visited a couple different ones, 6 now, and every one of them every time I think I've seen the worst, I see one worse. Basically, they're just areas of ground set out in the middle of the elements. The students sit knee to knee, cross-leg, and there is basically a 20-foot by 20-foot area will seat about 25 students. The only thing that keeps the sun and the elements off them is a blue tarp that we use to cover up boats and cars and stuff like back home. And at the same time, it's about 100 degrees, and the wind and everything else that plays into that. So it's a challenging, just let alone the lack of supplies they have. Lack of supplies go from when we give out a pencil, we can break it into fourths and give it to kids, and you think that they just received a couple $1,000 gift that we would expect our kids to react to back home. So it's quite the experience. They're definitely in need of structures for schools here. A lot of our organizations here are reaching out and trying to build schools, but currently it's just any location they can find and put cover over.
We kind of alluded to this, but how have the children responded to this literacy outreach?
Well, the literacy part of our campaign is basically providing children's books. Every student in Afghanistan does receive some sort of English lessons, and English is taught in almost all schools. The actual interaction with the kids is very limited because there is a serious security situation. We can't really stay at a school very long because then we put the students at risk for a possible scenario that may come up. So we only stay 30 to 45 minutes. I wish we could stay more and really get engaged with the literacy, but really our number one mission is putting supplies, including children's books in English, into the students' hands so they have the resources to learn English and to learn literacy. It's common around here in Afghanistan that the only way the Afghanistan children will get themselves out of the current situation they're in is through education. And it's common knowledge over here, and kids take their education pretty seriously over.
What is the local language, and how do you communicate with the locals? You said, you're involved there doing literacy lessons. How do you communicate with them?
As much as I provide to them and teach them, they teach me. The primary language over here is Dari. They also have Pashtun, but Dari is probably the predominant language. I have an interpreter assigned to me that's with me at all times, but I try and pick up as much as I can as I go. So the communication breakdown isn't too bad, and it's really nice to see an Afghan student come up to you and try and speak to you in English, and you'd be amazed at the number of students here in Afghanistan that actually can speak some sort of broken English, if not speak very good English at a young age.
How has working in these schools increased your cultural awareness and sensitivity to the literacy needs in Afghanistan?
It's really opened my eyes. Being a principal back in Michigan, it's really, I guess, humbling to see the situations and the environment these students are in, and they're forced to have to learn in because there is no other option. It really helps me kind of reset what I need to make sure that I push when I get back with my students, which is taking opportunities that we are provided because we're fortunate to be in the United States, take those opportunities and make the best of them. The cultural interaction is incredible. I'm learning a whole new culture that I've never had any experience with. Generally, the Afghan people and students are very, very kind-hearted people. They will give you anything anything if they had any. They're just very kind people. They're very generous, and they're very open to teaching people their culture who are open-minded enough to learn it.
What do you think has contributed to your ability to establish and maintain strong and effective working relationships with the people of Kabul?
I think the number one thing is respecting their culture. Their culture isn't worse than ours, better than ours. It's just different than ours. And when you go with an open mind and understand that they've got some great things in their culture that sometimes we wish that we had a little more of, like family and some things that are important here. So as long as you go with an open mind and you respect them as a people, like we were respecting one another, they're very, very open to sharing their experiences and sharing what they know and what they can teach you. So it's been extremely rewarding and just having that interaction. And I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of interactions with Afghans where I've learned a great deal about them, and hopefully I've contributed a little bit to them.
Yeah. How has your professional experience working in a conflicted area affected you? What impact has it had on you?
Once again, I think the biggest thing is it's kind of like resetting your hard drive, where we often in the United States get in this rat race where we're running around and we blow little things out of proportion, and it's just kind of what we do. Here, when you get to see how fortunate we really are, it kind of resets your hard drive, as I alluded to, where you really start to put what's important first. And it's nice to have that grounding effect to go from. It's really a rewarding experience, and it just helps me realize how fortunate we and myself really are to be an American living in the United States.
What do you see as some of the issues surrounding the development of educational institutions in transitional countries such as Afghanistan?
Some of the biggest challenges they have are the population in most of your major cities where coalition soldiers and bases are has increased exponentially. In the last 8 years in Kabul alone, they've seen their population go from around 500,000 to 3.5 million. And it's basically because people are fleeing to where they feel safe. This is where they feel safe. But the problem that brings is there's no infrastructure, there's no schools, there's no supplies to support that kind of influx of people into a community. Currently, the schools run on 3 separate shifts per day. Each school shift only lasts 3 hours, and then that group of students go home, a new group of students come, they get 3 hours, and then they do it again for a third time. And it's hard for them, with as much as they know that their education is important, that's all that can be provided through their local government, because they don't have enough time in the day and they don't have the structures and the educated teachers to actually give them the direct instruction that they yearn for.
Well, what kind of recommendations or suggestions can you make that would apply to longer-term involvement of quality of literacy education in Afghanistan?
I think it starts with the material that they have. Just as we are back in America, they're hands-on learners. And if they can have these resources in their hands, children's books, paper, pen, the things that we take so for granted, if they just have those things, it really puts them leaps and bounds ahead of where they're currently at. We will continue as a coalition force to try and not only fix the adult issues they have here, but also try and set a better situation for the children to grow up in. Because we all know, as they do, the only way to really fix a country, to have them move forward, is to teach the youth to think for themselves and be able to be problem solvers and advance where they're at academically.
And lastly, Bryan, how can educators in Michigan help support this project?
Well, first off, I appreciate this opportunity to thank the many teachers and schools that have already been sending things. It's greatly appreciated, and 100% of every donation that's sent here goes directly to the hands of an Afghan student. None of us are paid. We are all volunteers, and we do it all on what little spare time we have left over at the end of the day. So what we look for is children's books. That's always what the Afghan students are trying to get their hands on, and it's always in short supply here. So any children's books or any school supplies, to include erasers, pencils, pens, scissors, children's scissors, of course, and those kind of things all go a long way here. There are many more students than we could ever provide for, but every one we provide for is one that didn't have if we weren't involved in this organization.
Bryan, thank you so much for what you're doing over there in the reserves for children and extending literacy over there. I can make a huge difference in their country. I have an address here. If people want to send donation items, they can send it to Bryan Schroeder, AEF 866, Project Outreach, Camp Phoenix, APO Base AE 09320.